This is a book review of Surfaces and Essences, this book, which is a really, really powerful book about thinking. And it basically makes the argument that analogy is the bedrock of thinking. That's its whole thesis. And my hope is to describe for you enough information so that you can tell, is this book worthwhile for you? And in particular, I think this is a great book for writers and for teachers and for academic thinkers, people who want to make breakthroughs in science in their own fields, because it really gives you a great way of thinking about thinking. And the style of the book is actually very relaxed. So I'm going to say it's really good bedtime reading. And that might give you the wrong impression because bedtime reading, it sounds like, okay, it's going to put me to sleep. And on some level, yeah, I think it would put you to sleep, but not for those reasons, not because it's boring and not relevant to your real life. It's more just it has a mellow, sort of almost stream of conscience way of writing, where it's kind of like going through a person's relaxed day, hearing their thoughts about analogies and about, things they're thinking as they encounter the coffee shop and as they interact with people on the street. It's just this mellow, relaxed way of thinking that's both profound and also comforting in some ways. The writing is good, but it's not good in the sense that it provokes a problem and makes you feel the need to solve that problem and then solves it for you. That's one style of writing. No, the style of writing in this book is more pondering, meandering, and going through a series of arguments with examples that everybody can relate to from their daily lives. That's the basic style of the book. Now, the whole book is an argument that analogy is the basis for thinking. And they sort of, one thing they do in the book is they'll go through how do children learn to think about concepts. And so they have the example of mother, the idea of mother. Children don't learn that by learning a definition or memorizing a textbook definition. They learn the vast majority of words they learn through sort of experience in the real world. And they point out how a lot of times children will initially call all women mother. And that's, of course, wrong. And then the child encounters situations where another child is calling their mother, mother, and they're like, isn't, all females being mothers, isn't that the idea of mother? But people will correct them and say, no, that's not your mother. And the child will eventually learn, oh, there's an analogy between me and my mother and that child and their mother. And that analogy captures the essence of the word mother. So that's the sort of example they give. But they build this up, and I think this is important for understanding how expertise builds up and how creative and revolutionary thinking happens. Because we know that a lot of times the most creative and relevant breakthroughs in a field happen because somebody compared that field to another field. So we're talking like breakthroughs in chemistry that happen because a biologist goes to a chemistry conference and makes analogies with the biology field that had not yet been introduced in chemistry. So that kind of thing is oftentimes the way new knowledge happens. And of course, as a liberal arts professor, I'm a strong fan of learning different disciplines and using those disciplines and their analogies and their ways of thinking to bring more creative thought into your own discipline. That's sort of part of the essence of liberal arts colleges. I think this is also a reason why learning broadly, like learning from experiences that you have in the wilderness when you're out hiking, or learning from social dynamics at the Thanksgiving table, all of those, if you pay attention in those cases, you may develop things that will make good analogies in other spaces. In the book, they talk about the way analogy works to aid thinking, both in the mundane and also in sort of academic environments. As a matter of fact, there's a whole section of the book near the end that goes into Einstein and how did Einstein come up with his theory of relativity. And they kind of make the argument that actually it was spending time with these little thought experiments where Einstein was imagining himself in a little mini rocket and was playing around with what would happen if the rocket did this or the rocket did that. So there were inherent analogies going on to build up Einstein's thinking about relativity. Now, it's been a few months since I've read it, so maybe rocket wasn't the right example. Maybe it was train. I don't know. But the idea is that a lot of times, new thought comes from thought experiments where we're making analogies with what would happen in the rocket if it were this big thing rather than this microscopic thing. And in terms of analogy in everyday life, a lot of this feels like a linguistics book because the authors know both English and French, and they really think carefully about what are the concepts that open up such that people can think more clearly about them, because the language they speak in regularly is based on an analogy. And the book really fits with my understanding of cognitive science. Because a few years ago, some psychology professors and some other professors on campus got together to do a teaching workshop on cognitive science. And we read a couple of books, which I will link to, I'll show. I don't remember off the top of my head the names of those books. But they were teaching books that were based in cognitive science. And when I read this book, I kept thinking about that workshop and how closely what they're talking about here aligns with the current thinking in cognitive science. Now, there's this section at the end of the book that is a dialogue between two characters, Katie and Anna. And the dialogue has one of them arguing for analogy as the basis of thought, and the other arguing for categorization as the basis of thought. And I would have expected, having read the rest of the book where they made the specific argument for analogy, I would have expected the analogy character to win the argument. But it was really more of a back and forth Platonic dialogue where they were exploring actually the person who's making the argument that categorization is the basis of thought against analogy, that person actually has some really good points to make. And it's actually kind of hard to decide which is the right basis for thought. So that's the sort of thing that this book does, is that it really explores with a very open mind how people think and how people create new ideas and how people understand things for the first time. I could go on and on about this book and how good it is, but I'll stop there. I hope this is enough information for you to decide, is it worth 34 hours of your life listening to the audiobook, or perhaps half the time to read the print copy? For me, it was worth it. If you're interested in those topics, if you need some good bedtime reading, I think it's worth it.